Being a foster child growing up, I moved around many, many times as a child. You either learn how to get along with people very quickly and acquiesce to a situation, or you're not going to flourish. You're just not. So you actually learn to handle a pretty wide variety of conditions, you know, small town, farm, housing project, city, suburbs. There was no slice of the American landscape that I hadn't had some experience with. 15 different religions of churches. You saw what they had in common, you saw what they didn't have in common. I always had to assess the situation very fast. Like, oh, this is the new home I'm going into. I could tell by the tattered awning and the dead grass and the beer cans, this was going to be a tough ride. But when I see the tidy lawn, new car, I'm going, okay, gravy time for a while with this family, yes. So I'm 6 years old. I can assess the situation as good as a homicide police officer, right? I notice rings, who's married, who's not, what the deal is, who's flirty, who's friendly. So by the time you start contemplating a vocation, what do I want to be when I grow up? I made a promise to myself that I would pursue something where I could use all the somewhat hard-earned lessons. So it was like counselor, maybe a coach, diplomat, and then journalism knocked on my door one day. I was a track and field athlete in high school, and I was successful, and they were doing a lot of stories on me. And then one time an editor said, hey, you're at the meets anyway. Can you grab the results sheets from the coach and phone it in and just kind of give us the results? That's how we do it. We have somebody call in. And I became like a little stringer for the paper. And in the end, they wanted me to actually write stories, which was complicated because I was writing stories about track meets that I was in. But the bottom line is I got in the school paper, I started stringing for the local paper, and eventually by the time I was about 18, they said, well, if you're going to do little feature stories, you need to do your own photos. So while I had messed around with an Instamatic or a Polaroid, I didn't know anything about cameras, obviously. Went and bought a camera for $50, and driving home from the camera store, I was 18 years old, there was a big fire out in the suburbs. I just followed the smoke. I didn't have a scanner. And I didn't really know how to work the camera. They'd loaded film in it. So I just shot like 500 at 8, 60th at 22, just in broad daylight with 400 ASA film. So when they took the film to the small paper where they knew me, they developed the film and made a contact sheet. And the photographer who did the lab work said, this looked like a checkerboard, because the exposures were, but one came out. So now there's this front page picture, big fire in the valley. And I'm like, okay, we're onto something here. Because writing stories took me hours. This was like, I took a picture in 15 minutes and dropped off the film and I was a hero. This is gonna work. But I still was constantly using my journalistic skills that were really not journalistic skills. They were survival skills, or to use a cliche, people skills. Because if I saw a food line of people getting free food for Thanksgiving, I grew up with people like that. Poor people, beer drinkers, people with 3 divorces and been evicted and had no car. Those were my people. Where another journalist might have this gap, like, well, I grew up in a really tidy little neighborhood and I don't know how to talk to those people. Those are my people. And they recognized instantly, like, hey, you ever made sugar sandwiches? You ever had tuna for dinner 4 days in a row? They knew I was one of them, and so I didn't have to really spend all this schmooze time to convince them that I was cool enough to take their picture. They were like, your family, get in here. So I think I had early success because I didn't spend years mastering the art of making them feel comfortable or being comfortable with them, because there were so many situations I'd had to learn to adjust to. So, a chameleon doesn't worry about what color the leaves are around him. He'll work with it.